Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, our special program, Alaska Calling. I'm Tian Wei. We begin today's program with a highly anticipated meeting between Chinese and U.S. top diplomats in the Alaskan city of Anchorage. These are the first high-level, in-person bilateral talks since Biden took office, and they got off to a fiery start on Thursday. The opening remarks in front of journalists were said to be scheduled for a few minutes, but ended up lasting almost an hour. In a rare display, both sides shed diplomatic tones and leveled sharp rebukes of the other's policies.
Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan, cyber attacks on the United States, economic coercion toward our allies. Each of these actions threaten the rules-based order that maintains global stability.
在一些地区的问题
In regards to some regional issues, I think the issue is that the U.S. relies heavily on its military and financial hegemony to maintain its long-arm jurisdiction against some countries by using the so-called notion of national security to suppress and hamper normal trade transactions, as well as provoking other countries to launch offensives against China.
正常的贸易往来，而且 煽动一些国家对中国进行攻击。
The U.S. side opened the meeting with a tough stance by accusing China on issues regarding Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. China's top foreign affairs leader Yang Jiechi responded with a 15-minute speech in Chinese, rebuking the aggressive American position. Both sides accused the other of violating diplomatic protocol. And take a look at all of these. The highly unusually extended back and forth in front of the camera has drawn certainly great interest on social media from both countries and beyond. In front of cameras, the atmosphere seems to be tense, but Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi says that behind closed doors, both sides laid out their positions and engaged in very productive talks. The two sides have now finished 2 sessions already, while a third session of talks was scheduled for Friday morning. And for more on the Alaska talks, we are joined in Wyoming, United States. Robert Ross, the associate at the John King Fairbanks Center for Chinese Studies at Harvard. Good to see you. And also in New Orleans, Joseph Gregory Mahoney, professor of politics at East Asia Normal University in Shanghai. Last but not least, in Beijing, via phone, we have Yuan Peng, who is the president of the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. Great to see and hear from all of you, gentlemen. What a day. I want to start by asking Professor Yuan Peng, what is your take of the exchange of barbs, as the media put it, for the very first session in the series of talks between U.S. and China? Professor Yuan, your take.
Oh, yes. It's a very unique, very unprecedented. And even if before they began to talk, many media predicted should be very tough in conversation. But still, the several minutes opening remarks lasted so long, and the very tough stand in each side still unprecedented. I think maybe it's a real picture of the relations today. So both sides admitted that the relations in a very serious competition. So maybe it's a good thing that both sides present its own stance, representing its own national interests. This is what's the real picture of the relations. But in other side, I should say, from Chinese perspective, I should say, American side this time shows a little bit impolite and unfriendly in the first round, because you are the guests, you are the hosts. We Chinese are the guests. We fly a long journey to Alaska to show our sincerity, want to manage the relations, want to resolve problems.
Yeah.
So as the guests, you should not just repeat all those old rhetoric like Xinjiang, Taiwan, Hong Kong, sort of things, and blaming on China. And before that, you just have a Quad dialogue. You visited Japan and South Korea. Seems that you already set this very framework in advance, so that to shape China in Americans frame. I think this is we Chinese side at this time State Councilor Wang and Director Yang, I think, to show very sincerity. I hope in the next round maybe both sides should be in a more polite attitudes.
Well, very interesting opening certainly for the first session, but the second session already wrapped up. So, Mr. Ross, I'm sure you are also watching from Wyoming very closely. You are familiar with 4 of them, both the American and the Chinese side.
Yes, I have to say I'm quite disappointed and quite saddened by the beginning of our first dialogue in U.S.-China relations under the Biden administration. For those of us who worked so hard over the years, myself, Yuan Peng, and others, to promote U.S.-China cooperation understanding, this is the worst I can imagine the relationship has been since Henry Kissinger visited China in 1971. It's unfortunate. Many of us might agree with some of the statements by the Biden administration, but it doesn't establish a good foundation to negotiate and reach understandings when, as observed, sanctions are placed on Chinese officials days before meetings. You go around the region trying to present a united front to coerce China to compromise. You accuse China and implicitly its leadership of genocide, and then you expect China to have a welcome, warm greeting. I think this is something of a fiasco. I think going forward, we're going to have a very difficult situation, and I'm not optimistic. The United States, when it says it wants to cooperate with China, mentions really what they're saying is we want China to cooperate with American interests, whether it's in Iran, whether it's in North Korea, whether it's in climate change. But I've yet to hear the Americans discuss Chinese interests, and on the contrary, the United States seem intent on escalating tension in the South China Sea and in the Taiwan Strait. The United States seems to have a perspective on American power, which is somewhat antiquated in terms of its relationship to China. And we have a new relationship with China. However much you may disagree with China on many things, whether it's domestic politics, whether it's international politics, cooperation requires some degree of respect and some degree of moderation of one's own feelings to promote an agenda. We haven't seen this yet in the United States.
I see. Professor Mahoney, I also want to have your opinion as well.
Well, a lot of times these meetings are somewhat choreographed, and these 2 diplomats from China, they're very savvy, they're very experienced. I'm sure they didn't walk into a trap. They seem well prepared for the response. I think it's good for both sides to share their honest feelings. But to a large extent, I think we understand that the Biden administration is posturing for its domestic critics, and it is trying to position itself to gain some leverage in talks. But I think the real concern here, and I have some optimism and some pessimism, is that we had this old term in China of the United States following a two-handed approach. The United States following a two-handed approach towards China, one hand extended in greeting, the other pulled back in a fist. I think what we're seeing in the Biden administration is kind of a three-handed Frankenstein. There's an effort for or a call for cooperation, but also a call for competition, and also clearly some efforts to contain. So I think from the Washington perspective, this looks like pragmatism, but I think it also looks like Biden is playing chicken with his domestic critics, and it's not yet clear whether or not this is going to offer a viable foreign policy, or whether it risks collapsing in its own contradictions, especially above all if China refuses to play along.
That's the thing. I mean, all these posturing, whatever you want to name it, whether it really serves the U.S. interests at all, not to mention the collective interests, both U.S. and China, because there are collective interests. And on that, I have also from Shanghai, Professor Shen Dingli from the Institute of International Studies at Fudan University. Professor Shen, your comments. Professor Shen.
Suggest that there are, yes, can you hear me?
Go ahead, sir.
I think both U.S. and China have agreed that we should cooperate wherever we can cooperate. So U.S. want to cooperate, China wants to cooperate, but the U.S. also say U.S. would confront with China wherever it must confront. And China want to have a list management with the U.S. to minimize those contents of disagreement. So if the two countries would cooperate wherever they can cooperate and also would agree to disagree, I think I'm still hopeful for the day 2 of the, such a level of dialogue, because they are going to have another day of dialogue.
Right. Let's just focus on the second round of dialogue, because it's not just the fiery exchanges, which the media picked up, but the real thing going on for the second dialogue. After the second round, Chinese State Council Foreign Minister Wang Yi, answering very briefly remarks from the media, he said it's actually exchange opinions about the regional issues. Now, that's a very important clue. What is going on? Professor Yuan Peng, help us to understand what might be some of the regional issues. Would that bring the two sides together?
Round should be more constructive talking, because the first round focused on too much on its political stand on each side. It's quite understandable. But the second round, I hope at least the American side should go beyond the domestic political driven attitudes, because we once expected that Biden administration should show some differences in its China policy from Trump administration. We call it a window of opportunity. But if too much focus on domestic, too much driven by domestic politics, too much led by the so-called old story like human rights, Hong Kong, Taiwan, rather than ignoring the common problems like COVID-19, economic recovery, regional challenges, and the climate changes, I think is unconstructive. So I hope after the first round rebuke on domestic political stand, the second round will back to resolving those real common challenges, and also mutually understanding its domestic agenda in each side, and also focus on bilateral relations. That is what we want to expect.
Right. So, Mr. Ross, so let's have some sophisticated talk. That seems to be the focus of second round, regional issues. Can something achieved for the first time talk on the regional issues? What's likely to be the foundation, if it's a good one, to be laid here?
Let's be clear, there are 3 regional issues. There is for the United States, the North Korea problem, and for China, there's the Taiwan issue, and then there's the South China Sea. The Americans want Chinese help on North Korea, but until the United States is prepared to negotiate mutual concessions with North Korea, conduct reciprocity, consider lifting sanctions, neither the Chinese nor the South Koreans are going to support American policy. On the Taiwan Strait, let's be clear now, since the administration has come into power within the last 2 months, the number of U.S. transits of military ships through the Taiwan Strait have increased. Arms sales have taken place and licensing has taken place. We've seen no U.S. interest thus far in trying to reduce the tension, I might say, despite some signals of Chinese goodwill. And in the South China Sea, the situation is similar. We've seen an escalation of U.S. presence. It seems the United States is not prepared to make the concessions necessary to signal or I shouldn't say concessions, make the adjustments necessary to ratchet down the tension.
Okay.
I've seen nothing to suggest that the two sides were prepared to have some reciprocity to reach a mutual reduction of tensions. I think this meeting today is the second meeting is primarily focused on laying down positions, which at this point on these three regional issues are totally contradictory to each other.
I see.
It's going to be a long time before the United States can begin to ratchet down its high-level diplomacy that has pressured China and to retreat to a more constructive position. That will be difficult to do. Yes, perhaps we've done much of this for domestic politics, but in overplaying your hand in domestic politics, you've undermined the prospects for cooperation. And then if you want to improve cooperation by reducing your hostile posture, then now you open yourself up even more for domestic criticism, for seemingly backing down in face of Chinese pressure.
Got your
the
point.
Administration's in a terrible position right now.
Got your point. It's a vicious cycle, isn't it? Professor Shen,
Yes,
I know.
it is.
Yeah, I know you guys are very familiar with one another. You've been doing research and debate about China-U.S. relations for decades. Tell me your take on this. With quite a dramatic opening, will the two sides be able to at least achieve something in terms of what many have hoped, at least a beginning?
Yes, I do believe the two countries have genuine intent to achieve something. And because the U.S. has made it very clear, cooperate wherever the two countries can. And apparently, U.S., China supporting WHO to make WHO to play a central role in navigating the world free from pandemic. This is the common interest of U.S. and China. China-U.S. may not cooperate directly, but they could cooperate under the framework of WHO. And for North Korea, U.S. would appreciate China if the DPRK would shoot some long-range missile test, conducting another nuclear weapon detonation. And the U.S. need China to work on this. And U.S. and China are against those open de jure independence of Taiwan. So I think the two countries share lots of interest, though they retain lots of difference. I do hope for this categorized talk, the list of cooperation, the two countries would deliver something for us to see.
The world is watching. Actually, there are responsibilities on both sides to be able to deliver something, to answer the concern of the world. Professor Mahoney, your take, briefly. Regional issues, and also what's next for the third round.
Yeah, I think that...
Go ahead.
Yeah, clearly the biggest, stickiest issue is Taiwan. I expect that they're coming to a tacit agreement on how to better manage tension with Taiwan and the South China Sea. The real question is going to be whether or not the Biden administration, like previous administrations before the Trump administration, will play a role in disciplining Taiwan to keep the separatist or the independence movement there in check. The biggest question is the economy. Biden won't say it directly, but the U.S. really needs a lot of economic help. His high-risk stimulus package is going to need to resolve this trade war one way or the other. I don't think we're going to see much movement on the tech war. We might see some supply chain exceptions to keep production moving. But, you know, the United States is likely moving in the direction of a national industrial policy. So that's where we're going to see competition. But the one thing that we haven't heard the others mention is Myanmar. There's some talk about maybe some cooperation there. I don't see that yet. And I don't think that North Korea is really in the discussion here. I think it's really about Taiwan. I think North Korea is doing its own thing.
All right. There are a lot of things going on, certainly behind the doors, that would be the topic for many of us for days and probably months to come. We're going to continue with our discussion with all of you, Shen Li, Joseph Mahoney, Yuan Peng, and Robert Ross.